From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
Good morning, everyone. Did I say good morning? Good evening, everyone. Nick Beres here on Open Line. I appreciate you all joining us right now as we've just concluded our half-hour special from 6:30 to 7 o'clock on News Channel 5. And as we said at the end of that, we want to join you now live with a chance for you to ask questions, comments along the lines of where we stand on the Joe Clyde Daniels case. Obviously, a big case that's scheduled to go to trial finally after 3 years next week. We're going to talk about it this evening with News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. We do this so often in the morning. I go, wow, okay, I'm not here that often at night.
It didn't sound like a mistake to me.
Yeah, it sounded legit, didn't it? But listen, we're going to open up the phone lines, 737-7587. If you'd like to call in, ask a question. If you've been following this case, so many people have. We also are streaming live right now on Facebook on newschannel5.com if you want to go there, as well as the station's website. And I'll be monitoring that for any questions or comments you make on Facebook. But let's start things off with Nick Leonardo and where we stand here after 3 years finally. It's going to be going to trial next week. Before we talk about the fact that jury selection will start early next week, the fact that it's taken 3 years like this, aside from the fact that we had a pandemic this past year which shut everything down, how unusual is it for a case like this to take this long to finally go to trial, Nick?
Well, it is a bit unusual. I would say the average case of, that has this kind of, or these kinds of charges could potentially take, a couple of years to get to trial. But I believe in this case we had a change in some defense attorneys.
That's true.
At some point along the way. And of course, when that happens, the new defense attorneys have to get up to speed on all the evidence. And there's a ton of evidence in this case. And so, that was a delay. And then you take the pandemic, which we really haven't been having any jury trials for almost a year. It gets us to where we are today.
Okay, and some people say, well, what about a quick and speedy trial? The parents have been locked up now for all this time, $1 million bond for each of them. But a lot of the delays that were requested actually were requested by the defense. Right. So they were kind of, okay, I guess, with the idea of not going to trial quickly.
Well, it's hard when you're a defense attorney to file a motion for a speedy trial and to get in there and go before the judge and say, prosecution, you need to hurry up, we need a trial, when you yourself have been there, previously, and you've asked for continuances as well.
You're right.
So you kind of take the good with the bad, but obviously, the state is ready to go forward in this case, and obviously the defense is too, and we're getting ready to see what evidence, if any, other than these alleged confessions that they have against the both of these individuals.
All right, what we can say is, in terms of what we expect happening next week, jury selection. Now, of course, we have a holiday on Monday, but jury selection at a city outside of Dixon. They're going to bring a jury in from elsewhere, okay? It has not been announced exactly where, but my understanding it's going to be either Knoxville or Chattanooga, most likely. They will go on Tuesday and begin jury selection in one of those two locations, likely. And my guess is that jury selection will take maybe a day, possibly two, with a chance that we'll actually have courtroom testimony beginning either late Wednesday or sometime Thursday. What do you think, Nick? How difficult will it be to choose a jury in a city outside of Dixon County? I think people would be surprised, but folks, say in Chattanooga, probably don't know much about this case.
I would agree, and it's not that you can never have heard about this case, is that your mind cannot be made up about the facts. So you may have heard of this case, but as long as you don't have an opinion one way or the other, you may very well be a good juror in this particular case. And the defendants, or the defense in this case, Mr. Daniels, they're going to have 8 challenges here for cause that they can, get rid of jurors and not have to give any explanation why. And the state also has those peremptory challenges that they can also use. And then if there's, a reason why somebody should be dismissed for cause, the judge could do that. But, it can very well it may take a couple of days to get, the prospective jurors and to come up with the ones that you need, and maybe a couple of alternates. And it's also going to take a little bit longer because the court's going to tell these prospective jurors that, you're going to be sequestered, and you're going to be sequestered in Nashville, away from your family. And obviously there could be a whole host of reasons why people are unable to do that, whether they have small kids, their job, or any kind of reason. So it's a whole lot more difficult in this particular situation, since they're sequestered, to be able to get a jury than it would be just in a regular old trial.
Yeah, so you're taking people away from their home,
correct,
be it one of these cities away from the area. What they'll do is, after they've selected a jury, let's say they finish selecting a jury Wednesday afternoon, they'll send them home, say, get your stuff, and then will they bring them here by bus? And then they'll check into whatever hotel they're going to stay at, and then maybe begin things Thursday morning?
you know, if they're able to do that, you know, obviously if they're selected, they're going to allow them to go home for a bit, okay, and to, you know, gather their belongings, give them a few hours, and they, you know, typically would put them on a bus, you know, maybe it's a couple of small passenger buses, and bring them back to an undisclosed location. You know, it's probably harder in Dixon than it is in Nashville to bring them to an undisclosed location, but that's where they'll house them, that's where they'll feed them 3 meals a day, and that's where they will, you know, make sure that they're not having any contact with the outside world. They don't have smartphones, they don't have computers, you know, they don't read newspapers, so that they can protect the integrity of this process, and that's exactly why they're sequestered.
It's interesting, I'm looking at some of the comments we're getting right now on Facebook, and one individual saying he thinks that a lot of people who have followed this case have already made up their mind. And I think that's probably one reason this judge, at least in the Dixon County general area, believes that minds are already made up. And I'll just say it, based on my coverage and the response on my Facebook page, the vast majority of people think the parents are responsible.
Well, and you know, I think it's interesting, and we don't know exactly where they're going to select this jury, but you're supposed to go to a like community. And of course, when you have Dixon County, I don't know that Knox County or Hamilton County, you know, they're a whole lot bigger than Dixon County. And so, you know, maybe they're going to Maryville or something, you know, to select jurors, but you're supposed to go to a like demographic in a like county. So it'd be interesting to see where they're going.
We want to take some phone calls as well as the comments I continue to monitor on Facebook, but we've got the calls already in, and jump in. We're going to go till 8 o'clock. If you have questions, anything that's been bugging you or something along the lines of this case as it goes to trial in a week, give us a call, 737-7587. We've got Coco on line 1. Coco, good morning. Hi, or good afternoon. Sorry, I got to get out of that. I'm so used to the morning. Go ahead, Coco.
Don't worry, it happened.
Yeah.
I've got a comment. Well, they don't know if he did it or not, but if he did kill the child, what would he do with the body, or would he come out and confess or not?
Yeah, that's, well, a great question. I mean, here's the thing. People believe, so many, that he did do it. And what I have trouble getting past is, okay, there's no physical evidence. Where is the body? Not only that there's not a body, they didn't find a pool of blood where he supposedly was beating him to death in the living room after the claim was that Joe Clyde had urinated on the floor and started laughing and infuriated the father. That was part of what we said. They haven't found hair fibers. They didn't find any bruises on his knuckles. That's where it's tough. You say, well, it sounds like he confessed, but there's no physical evidence, Nick.
Well, and you know, just like I said before we came over here to this studio, that in Tennessee you can sustain a conviction for first-degree murder simply off circumstantial evidence. So you may not have to have, you know, that dead body. But again, in this particular situation, we have several different, what the state would label as confessions. And obviously the judges rule that they can come into evidence, but you have several of them, and then you have them recanting the confessions. And so that's a pretty powerful piece of evidence. If it's something that's videotaped, and you have a parent, an adult, sitting here confessing to killing their child. I mean, who could imagine, you know, confessing to killing your child if you didn't do that? So, you know, they have some pretty compelling evidence, and we haven't even seen it, but that's what we've heard about these confessions. Yeah,
the confessions and whether or not they'll be allowed is one of the big issues. We should say there was a hearing just last week where the judge ruled, yes, the confession will be allowed based on a legal challenge that Joseph Daniels was coerced. He said, no, he wasn't coerced, that'll be allowed. But there is still one other hurdle before it's a sure go for the trial. And one of our viewers has asked you if you would be able to explain to him, and again, our viewers are right on top of this, but the Bishop rule and how that applies to whether or not there is corroborating evidence. Is that what it is? Is it the Bishop rule? Is that it?
You know, I don't. That's probably one of the first times I've been stumped on this show. I haven't heard of that in a while, but typically they want to corroborate those kinds of things.
That's essentially what it is. The way I understand it, whatever it's called, is that you just can't have someone say something and take it on its face value, that's the truth, unless there's some kind of evidence to support it. So if he says it, but there's no evidence to support what he said, it may not stand.
Well, but one of the oldest tricks in the book, and you know, most attorneys are, most prosecutors are great at this, is that they will go out and find people that may have overheard you mention, you know, something about confessing. So it could have been these other two children, okay, that we haven't heard from and we don't know.
We're going to touch on that. Another question for someone on that.
Right, and then there could be, you know, any member of the community. Maybe there's a family member or someone of that nature, but they're going to try to corroborate that those confessions because they're going to have to do that.
Right. Okay. And as far as, you know, the corroboration, that's what I'm wondering. They're going to have to rule on this Bishop issue. Once the trial starts, but with the jury back, and the judge will hear, and I heard it's a very low bar. I'm going to tell you right now, the confession is going to be allowed. There's no drama there. I know we still have that last hurdle, but there's no way that confession's not getting in. But then the question will be, though, what will the prosecution use to bolster it? And a lot of folks are saying, we know who else was in the house that night. Okay, there were two parents. Of course, they're both charged. There was an aunt who is 70% hard of hearing and was in a separate part of the home. And there's no indication she heard or saw anything. And then there were Joe Clyde's two siblings. At the time, one was 3 and one was 8. And the belief is, and they've been questioned, that if something happened in the home, they would have heard something. There was nothing in discovery, but I've heard that the 8-year-old at the time was questioned, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. Either he's in shock over something he saw, or this is a kid with a vivid imagination, it wasn't credible. But now I'm hearing that he might be called to testify. All of them have been subpoenaed. Do you think we might hear from one of his siblings?
Oh, I mean, I think so, because we don't know what is necessarily said, because the gag order has been in place.
Right.
But, you know, there's a chance you might hear from a sibling. But again, you know, you have, you know, a lot of times these inmates use the phone. These phone calls are recorded.
Yep.
As we saw with Perry March, they didn't have a body, but the star witness became Nathaniel Ferris, this
right.
cellmate next door whom March confessed to. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's going to be somebody that's going to be a surprise witness to corroborate this. I don't think it's going to be a mere scintilla of corroboration. I think it'll be kind of an over-the-top corroboration. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to who does the jury believe and how much weight do they place on that evidence.
Yeah, the credibility of that individual.
Correct.
We already know that Crystal Daniels will not testify against her husband. That's not going to happen. She's not been subpoenaed, and if she was, her attorney has said that he will not allow her to testify, taking the fifth against self-incrimination.
Correct.
So let's go to James. James, good afternoon, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
If who ain't convicted, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get out of jail, or what are they going to do? They're going.
Okay, the question there is a little scratchy on it, but basically asking if Joseph Daniels is not convicted, if they come back not guilty, he walks.
Absolutely.
And then, by the way, explain double jeopardy.
Well, double jeopardy means that he can't be tried for the same offense and put in jeopardy of life and limb twice. So,
meaning if new evidence surfaced that points directly to him after he's been acquitted, he's free.
Or if he wrote a book that says, if I had done it. Okay? I mean, it's the same sort of principle. So, but oddly enough, when, you know, the interesting point is that he doesn't really walk out of jail right that moment. He's still got to go back to the jail and get processed. A lot of folks think, well, if you're not guilty, why don't you just walk out the front door of the courthouse with everyone else? So, interestingly enough, he'll have to go back with the sheriff's department, or maybe I think he's being housed in the Department of Corrections custody. But
he's at Riverbend.
You know, so it may take a few hours for him to get back out, but he would be released, you know, that day. It just may take a few hours.
Let's take another call. This one's from Ellen. Ellen, good evening. Hi, Ellen.
Hey,
Hey, go ahead, ma'am.
is it possible he did something to little Joe several weeks ago, which would give him time to do something with his body, take it somewhere away from Dixon, and then call y'all several weeks later and say he just left? Is that possible?
It would have been a possible scenario that law enforcement would have looked into, but a lot of people ask, well, what about the grandparents? The grandfather's the truck driver. Some people have unfairly pointed to them as being suspect. They've been vetted. They were on the road. They were in Laredo, Texas when this all happened. They weren't involved. But Joe Clyde Daniels, I believe there had been reports that he had attended school. He had been, seen the day before.
Right.
I think the last time he was seen, so it wasn't, he was seen alive the day before. So it's not as though he could have killed him and disappeared, days before.
Well, there's this one witness that says that, or I think is going to say that she saw Joe Clyde on that evening, or a child outside, and asked him what his name was, and he said 5, and that was somehow indicative of what he always said. And of course, the question is, do you believe that she actually, saw a child that made that comment? But I want to say that was the evening.
That would have been after that goes to the heart of whether or not he wandered off. And there was someone who said the next day they saw their child had seen someone that looked like him. It doesn't appear as though she's going to be allowed to testify right now because her own child was too young to testify. The judge won't allow it on hearsay. So, there's no indication that he had disappeared prior to this. And that would have been something law enforcement would have looked into, right?
I think they've looked into quite a few leads on this.
Trust me, they vetted the grandparents. So please, no one point the finger at the grandparents. That's not fair. They are not considered suspects in any way. They were gone. They were not here. They're not part of this case from that regard. Listen, we're going to take a break on that note when we come back. A lot of phone calls have come in and a lot on Facebook, and I can just tell, boy, we followed this case closely. A heck of a lot of people there have followed it closely all across the country. We'll be back with your comments on Facebook, and if you'd like to join us, call the number. We're going till 8 o'clock. Back right after this.